The man who dumped hot lobster bisque over my head was on his knees, 10 minutes later trembling so hard his teeth clicked. The whole restaurant had gone silent. My wife Claire stood frozen beside our table, one hand pressed over her mouth, staring at me like she'd never seen me before. The same woman who had whispered, "You're embarrassing me," only minutes earlier, was now white as chalk. And the loudmouth who'd laughed while soup ran down my face. He was shaking, because he had finally learned who I was. But to understand how it got there, you have to understand what my marriage had become. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 52 years old that night, and until 10 minutes before Victor Kane made the biggest mistake of his life, I was just another quiet husband taking his wife to dinner on our 12th wedding anniversary. That's what it looked like anyway. The Harbor House sat along the Elizabeth River in Norfolk, Virginia, the kind of upscale waterfront place where retired officers brought their wives for birthdays and anniversaries. White tablecloths, soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers, expensive bourbon behind polished mahogany. I'd made reservations 3 weeks earlier. Claire almost canceled. She'd spent most of that afternoon on her phone in our bedroom while I got dressed downstairs. By the time we left, she barely looked at me. "You're wearing that?" she'd asked when she saw my navy blazer. I looked down. It was Brooks Brothers, tailored, conservative. "Yes," she sighed. "You always dress like someone's accountant." That was Claire these days, not cruel exactly, just disappointed. 12 years earlier, she'd loved my quiet nature, said it made her feel safe. Now she called it dull. Life changes people that way. When we first met, she was a pediatric nurse at Centara Norfolk General Warm and grounded and laughing at my dry little jokes. I was already retired from active service consulting for naval engineering firms under a civilian contract. She knew I'd served in the Navy. She never knew how, and because of the nature of that service, I could never tell her much more. At first, mystery made me interesting. Later, silence made me look weak. That's what she'd come to believe. And maybe that was partly my fault. I'd gotten good at saying nothing, good at carrying burdens no one could see, good at letting people underestimate me. That skill had kept men alive once. But in marriage, silence becomes distance. By dessert, we'd barely spoken. Claire scrolled through her phone while absently sipping Chardonnay. The candlelight caught the faint lines near her eyes. She was still beautiful, elegant, sharp-featured, the kind of woman who carried disappointment like expensive perfume, subtle but impossible to miss. Finally, I said, "Do you remember our first anniversary?" She didn't look up. "Not really," I smiled faintly. "We ate burgers in the rain because the power went out." Nothing. Then, that was before we realized who we really married. The words landed heavier than she intended, or maybe exactly as intended. I looked out toward the dark river. There are moments in a marriage when you realize you're not fixing cracks anymore. You're standing in ruins pretending it's still a house. That was when the front doors opened, and Victor Kane walked in. If you lived in Norfolk, you knew the name. His father owned half the waterfront developments along Granby Street. Money lawyers, political favors. Victor had inherited all the arrogance and none of the discipline. Late 30s, broad shoulders gone soft from whiskey, slicked back hair, too much cologne. 2 men followed him, private security or glorified thugs, depending on how charitable you felt. The room shifted when he entered. People noticed men like Victor the way animals notice predators. He scanned the room, grinning that grin rich men wear when they've never heard the word no. Then his eyes landed on me. I knew the type immediately. He saw gray at my temples. A calm face. No visible reaction. To men like Victor, restraint looks like fear. He walked over. "Well, what do we have here?" Claire stiffened. Victor smiled at her. "Well, sweetheart, you certainly married down." She gave an awkward little laugh. That laugh told me more than anything else could have. I looked at him and said evenly, "Move along." He blinked, then smiled wider. "Oh, he talks." His hand shot down faster than most men his size could move. He grabbed my bowl of lobster bisque, and before anyone could react, he dumped it over my head. The heat struck first, then the smell of cream and sherry. The restaurant gasped as red-orange soup streamed down my face, soaking my blazer. Victor laughed, a big barking sound that bounced off crystal glasses. "Look at him," he shouted, too scared to fight back. His bodyguards laughed with him. I slowly wiped soup from my eyes. Then I looked at Claire. Just once, just long enough for her to do one simple thing. Stand beside her husband? That was all. Instead, she looked away. Her voice came low and sharp. "Be quiet. You're embarrassing me." Something inside me went still. Not angry, not broken, still. A kind of cold clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind that used to settle over me before missions. When hesitation became impossible, I reached for my napkin, folded it carefully. set it beside my plate. Then I stood. Victor smirked. "Well, you gonna cry about it?" I looked him straight in the eye, then calmly knocked the empty soup bowl off the table. It shattered across the hardwood floor like a gunshot. Every head turned. The room fell silent. And I said the first words that would change all our lives. "You have exactly 10 minutes to apologize." Victor Kane laughed so hard he had to brace one hand against our table. The sound rolled through Harbor House like something rotten. Around us no one moved. No one spoke. A waitress near the bar froze with a tray balanced on one palm. Somewhere behind me I heard the pianist stop mid-note, and Victor just kept grinning. "You hear that, everybody?" He spread his arms wide, performing for the room. "This old man thinks he's in some kind of movie." A few nervous chuckles answered him, not because anyone thought he was funny, because men like Victor train people to laugh. Fear has a way of sounding like politeness. I stood perfectly still, lobster bisque, cooling on my scalp and dripping down the back of my neck. I'd been called worse things than coward. I'd had rifles aimed at my chest by men who meant business. I'd spent 23 years stepping into places decent people would never see, making choices no one should have to make. Compared to that, Victor Kane was just noise. Still, I watched him carefully, because noise can become danger when no one stops it. Across from me, Claire finally looked up. Her face had gone red, not with concern, embarrassment. Her eyes darted around the restaurant, measuring who had witnessed this little humiliation. Then she looked at me the way someone might look at a stranger causing a scene at church. "Daniel," she hissed. "Sit down." I didn't move. Victor leaned closer. "What's wrong?" He tilted his head, mocking sympathy. Too scared to hit me. I met his eyes. No, that single word made him blink. Just once. It was small, but I noticed. Predators always notice stillness. Real danger doesn't puff itself up. It gets quiet. He recovered quickly and sneered. "Then what?" I checked my watch. 10 minutes had already become 9. Then I stepped around him and walked toward the exit. Behind me came laughter. Big and ugly and relieved. Victor thought I was retreating. Claire thought so too. "Unbelievable," she muttered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You're actually running away." I paused without turning. There was a time those words would have cut deeply. That night they barely registered, because in that moment I understood something painful and simple. My wife truly believed I was weak, not because she'd seen weakness, because she'd never understood restraint. There's a difference, a dangerous one, and she had spent years mistaking silence for surrender. I kept walking. Outside, the cool Norfolk air hit my face. The harbor lights shimmered across black water. Somewhere down the street, a foghorn groaned low and distant. The city moved on, unaware that several lives were about to change forever. I reached into my jacket pocket. My phone was dry, good tailoring matters. The number wasn't saved. It never needed to be. I dialed from memory. The line answered before the first full ring. "Operations. This is Mercer." A pause. Then, "Authenticate. Blackbird 79 Echo." Another pause. Longer this time. Then the voice changed completely. "Professional. Alert. Identity confirmed. Commander Mercer." I hadn't heard that title spoken aloud in almost 6 years. Funny how quickly old muscles remember. "I need immediate verification presence at Harbor House, Norfolk. Civilian disturbance involving flagged federal interest." No hesitation. "Understood, sir. ETA 8 minutes. I ended the call. Then I stood there under the restaurant's brass awning looking out at the river. And memory found me. Afghanistan. A mountain compound under moonlight. 8 men breathing quietly through rebreathers while waiting for my signal. Every choice precise. Every movement measured. The kind of silence that carries life and death inside it. I had commanded SEAL team operations for over a decade. Not because I was the loudest. Not because I was the strongest. Because I stayed calm when calm was all that kept men alive. That same calm had followed me into civilian life. Into boardrooms. Into marriage. Into every moment Claire mistook for passivity. But command never really leaves you. It waits. Quietly. Until needed. The restaurant door opened behind me. Claire stepped out, wrapping her coat tighter against the wind. Her heels clicked sharply across the brick. She stopped beside me but didn't look directly at me. "What was that?" I said nothing. She exhaled hard. "You humiliated me in there." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "Interesting perspective." That turned her toward me. Her expression sharpened. "Oh, don't do that." "Do what?" "That cold little detached thing you always do when you're cornered." Cornered. The word nearly amused me. I had once spent 36 hours pinned inside a collapsed embassy annex with armed militia sweeping the floor above me. This was not cornered. This was clarity. Claire shook her head. "I've spent 12 years trying to understand you, Daniel." "No," I said quietly. You spent 12 years inventing who you thought I was. Her mouth opened, closed. For a moment, real uncertainty crossed her face. Then headlights swept across us. 3 black SUVs turned sharply into the circular drive. Government plates. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Claire frowned. What is this? The first vehicle stopped. Rear passenger door opened. A tall man stepped out in full Navy dress whites. Rear Admiral Thomas Keegan. Silver hair, sharp jaw, decorations enough to fill a display case. A man whose schedule usually involved Pentagon briefings and classified oversight committees. And he was here. For me, Claire stared openly now. What? The Admiral walked directly toward us, his face unreadable. 2 NCIS agents followed close behind. Then when he reached me, he stopped, came to full attention, and saluted. Commander Mercer, he said clearly. Apologies for the delay, sir. Behind us through Harbor House's front windows, every face in the restaurant turned toward the glass. And inside, Victor Kane's smile disappeared. For one long second, no one inside Harbor House moved. The restaurant had become a photograph. Frozen faces, half-raised wine glasses, the sharp glow of chandelier light against polished crystal. And beyond the front windows, reflected against the dark Norfolk harbor, Rear Admiral Thomas Keegan stood saluting me like we were back on active ground. Beside me, Claire's breath caught. I could hear it. A quick intake of air, thin and confused. Her whole body had gone rigid. I returned the salute automatically. Years disappear fast when muscle memory takes over. At ease, Admiral. Keegan lowered his hand. Even now, after all these years, he still carried himself the same way he had when he'd overseen joint special operations briefings overseas, straight-backed, economical, every movement deliberate. Yes, sir. Claire made a small sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a word. Her eyes moved between us, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She knew enough about military custom to understand what that salute meant. A man like Thomas Keegan did not salute civilians for fun. Behind him, 2 NCIS agents stood waiting in dark suits, hands folded calmly in front of them. Professional, silent, prepared. The restaurant doors opened behind us. Victor Kane stepped out with his 2 bodyguards still wearing that arrogant grin. Though I noticed it wasn't quite as wide now. He glanced at the Admiral, then at the agents. I watched him trying to calculate, trying to decide whether this was coincidence or consequence. Men like Victor always believe they can buy the answer. He gave a dismissive chuckle. Well, this is interesting. No one answered. Victor looked at me. Then at Keegan. What is this, some kind of stunt? Keegan turned his eyes toward him. And if you've never been on the receiving end of a senior command officer's full attention, it's hard to describe. It's not loud, not theatrical. It's simply the kind of focus that makes weak men aware of themselves all at once. Victor shifted slightly, just enough to notice. The Admiral spoke evenly. Victor Kane. Victor straightened. Yeah. Thomas gave the smallest nod to one of the NCIS agents. The man stepped forward and produced a folded document. Federal warrant authorization under Naval Criminal Investigative Jurisdiction. Victor laughed too quickly. Wait, what? The agent continued reading. Suspicion of procurement fraud, money laundering, coercion of federal subcontractors, and obstruction of military supply chain investigation. The color drained from Victor's face, not all at once, slowly. Like a curtain lowering, his bodyguards looked at each other. That told me everything. They hadn't known. Interesting. Victor recovered fast enough to sneer. This is ridiculous. He pointed directly at me. This because of him. Neither agent responded. Victor laughed again, louder this time. Forced. My father owns half the city. Keegan's expression didn't shift. I'm aware. You have any idea who our lawyers are? Yes. Victor's smile faltered. Then he looked at me more carefully. Really looked. The way prey finally studies what it mistook for scenery. And I saw it happen. Recognition. Not personal recognition. Institutional. The kind that comes when pieces click into place. The stillness. The posture. The way an admiral had addressed me. The title. Commander. His mouth opened slightly. He turned toward Keegan. Who is this? The admiral answered plainly. Commander Daniel Mercer, United States Navy, retired. Former operational lead, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Victor stared. His eyes widened. I watched him search memory for every story he'd ever heard about DevGru, about Tier 1 operators, about men whose names never reached newspapers because newspapers weren't cleared to know they existed. Claire whispered beside me. No. Her voice broke on the word. And for the first time all night, I felt something close to pity. Not for Victor, for her. Because in that instant, 12 years of assumption collapsed inside her all at once. The quiet husband she'd dismissed, The man she thought lacked ambition. The one she believed was too passive to defend himself. He had once commanded missions most Americans would never hear about. The humiliation on her face was deeper than embarrassment now. It was revelation. Victor took a slow step backward. His confidence had vanished so completely it was almost startling. His lips trembled. "Sir, I didn't know." I looked at him calmly. "No," I said. "That was your first mistake." The words landed harder than shouting ever could have. He swallowed visibly, then did something I'll never forget. He dropped to his knees, right there on the wet brick outside Harbor House. Not gracefully, not strategically. His legs simply gave out. A broken collapse. The kind men make when reality arrives too fast to brace against it. "Please," he said. The word came out ragged. His bodyguards backed away as if distance could save them. Victor looked up at me, panic flooding his face. "I'm sorry." No one moved. No one spoke. The harbor wind carried the scent of salt and diesel across the lot. Somewhere far off a buoy bell rang. Steady, indifferent. Victor's breathing became sharp and uneven. He looked suddenly younger. Not because fear had softened him, because arrogance had been the only thing making him seem large. Without it, he was just a frightened boy in expensive shoes. I crouched down until we were eye level. His whole body shook. And quietly, so only he could hear, I said, "You thought fear was weakness because fear is all you understand?" His eyes filled with tears. Real ones. Then I stood. Keegan gave a subtle nod. The NCIS agents moved in. One took Victor by the arm. The other secured his wrists. No struggle. No resistance. The fight had gone out of him completely. As they led him toward the SUV, he glanced back once. Not at me. At Claire. And what passed across his face was unmistakable. Recognition. He understood she hadn't known either, which somehow made her look even smaller. When they were gone, silence returned. The river moved quietly beyond the dock lights. And for the first time in 12 years, my wife looked at me like a stranger. "Daniel," her voice cracked. "Who are you?" I looked at her for a long moment, then answered with the hardest truth either of us would hear that night. "The man you never bothered to know." Claire followed me down the brick walkway in silence. The black SUVs had already disappeared into the Norfolk night, carrying Victor Kane toward whatever future men like him eventually earned for themselves. Rear Admiral Keegan had offered to stay. I declined. He understood immediately. He always had a way of knowing when a man needed command and when he needed solitude. Now only the sound of the Elizabeth River remained. Dark water rolling gently against dock pilings. A distant ship horn groaning somewhere beyond the harbor. And Claire's heels clicking behind me as she hurried to catch up. "Daniel." Her voice was trembling. Not angry anymore. Not sharp, just uncertain. I kept walking. "Daniel, please." There are moments in life when a familiar voice suddenly sounds foreign. That was the first time hers ever had. I stopped beneath a gas lamp near the marina. Its pale yellow light pooled across the wet pavement. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped closer. I turned to face her. And for the first time in 12 years, my wife looked afraid of me. Not physically afraid. Not the kind of fear Victor had shown on his knees. This was something deeper. The fear people feel when they realize their understanding of reality has been wrong for so long, they no longer know where truth begins. She swallowed hard. "Tell me what just happened." I looked at her. Really looked. The woman I'd loved for over a decade stood before me with tears gathering in her eyes. Her breath unsteady, her carefully practiced confidence stripped away. And I realized something painful. I didn't know her anymore either. Or maybe I never had. "You want the short version?" I asked. Her lips parted slightly. "Yes. I was a Navy SEAL." She stared. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. No immediate reaction. Just widening eyes and silence. Then, "No." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because denial was predictable. "You asked," I said. "That's impossible." "It isn't." She shook her head quickly as if movement alone might undo what she'd heard. "No, Daniel, stop." Her voice rose. "You worked in engineering consulting. After retirement." Her face paled further. "Retirement?" I nodded. "After 23 years." The marina breeze stirred loose strands of her hair. For a moment, she simply stared, trying to fit this truth into the shape of the man she thought she knew. It wouldn't fit. Finally, she whispered, "You're serious?" "Yes." The words settled heavily between us. Claire's mouth trembled. She looked away toward the dark water, and when she spoke again, her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Why didn't you tell me?" That question had lived inside our marriage for years. I'd always known it would come eventually, and I had rehearsed 1,000 possible answers. What surprised me was how simple the truth felt now. "Because I couldn't." She turned back sharply. "That's not enough." It had to be. Her jaw tightened. You could have trusted me. I held her gaze. No, Claire, I couldn't. That hurt her. I saw it instantly. But some truths wound simply by existing. You think I would have told someone? I think you underestimate what secrecy costs. Her eyes flashed. I was your wife. Yes. Then why keep your whole life hidden? I exhaled slowly. Because now there was no reason to protect what was already broken. And perhaps because some part of me wanted her to understand, even if understanding came too late. When I was 34, I said quietly, I led a hostage recovery operation outside Kandahar. She froze. The details meant little to her, but the tone did. Calm, measured. The voice of memory speaking facts too heavy for drama. There were 11 Americans inside an embassy annex. Intelligence was compromised. Our insertion window collapsed halfway through approach. I could still smell the dust. Hear rotor wash hammering the night. See the red pulse of tack lights against ruined concrete. We lost 2 men before breach. Claire's face changed. Not fully comprehension, but enough to know this wasn't storytelling. This was grief. I continued. We got the hostages out. Mission succeeded. My throat tightened slightly. Even now, years later, one of the men we lost had a daughter turning 6 the next morning. Claire covered her mouth. I kept my voice steady. I had to stand in dress whites and tell her mother he wasn't coming home. The marina seemed to go still around us. No wind, no movement, just memory. Then I looked directly into my wife's eyes. That was one day Claire. Her face crumpled. There were many others. Tears spilled freely now. Oh my God, yes. She shook her head, crying openly. And suddenly the polished woman who had spent years criticizing my silence looked very small and very human. I didn't know she whispered. No, the word came softer this time. Because she hadn't. Not really? And that ignorance had shaped everything. Claire wiped at her cheeks. Why stay silent after retirement? I thought about that, then answered honestly. Because men like me don't come home all at once. She frowned through tears. I went on. You spend decades becoming what duty requires. Controlled, detached, quiet. Then one day the uniform comes off and people expect ordinary conversation over breakfast. A bitter little smile touched my mouth. It doesn't work that way. Claire stared at me. And for the first time in years, I saw true listening in her face. Not judgment, not impatience. Understanding trying desperately to catch up. Then she whispered, I thought you were ashamed of your life. That struck deeper than I expected. I shook my head slowly. No, I looked out at the river. Then back at her. I was protecting the only parts of myself I had left. Claire broke completely then. Her shoulders folded inward as she sobbed quietly into both hands. And watching her, I felt no triumph, only sadness. Because revelation is not repair. Knowing the truth doesn't restore what disbelief has already destroyed. After a long minute, she looked up at me. Eyes red, voice raw. Can we fix this? There it was. The question every broken marriage eventually asks. And standing there beneath that Norfolk gas lamp with the river moving steadily toward open water, I realized I didn't know the answer. So I said nothing. And my silence told her everything. Claire stood under that marina gas lamp for a long time after I walked away. I know because I looked back once before turning the corner toward the parking structure. She hadn't moved. Her arms were wrapped around herself, shoulders trembling, staring at the dark river like she hoped the water might explain everything. But some truths arrive too late for explanation. And some damage settles so quietly over the years that you don't hear the final crack until everything collapses. Yes, true. I drove home alone. The streets of Norfolk were nearly empty, the kind of calm you only get after 10 at night when the bars are full and decent people have already gone home. Granby Street glowed behind me in the rearview mirror. Neon reflections stretched across wet pavement. The city looked peaceful. That always struck me as funny. Peace often looks ordinary to the people protected by it. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my suit jacket had stiffened with dried bisque. The smell clung to me, cream and sherry and humiliation. I stood in the kitchen for a while without turning on the lights, just listening to the refrigerator hum, the old wall clock ticking over the sink. The house was exactly as we'd left it. Claire's coffee mug beside the dishwasher, a folded sweater on the chair by the breakfast nook, a framed photo from our trip to Asheville 6 years earlier. We looked happy in it. Maybe we were. Or maybe happiness is easiest to recognize after it's already gone. I went upstairs and showered. Hot water washed away the soup, not the night. That remained. Afterward, I sat in my study with a glass of bourbon and stared at the darkened backyard. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. This had always been my refuge. The one part of the house Claire rarely entered. Too quiet for her, she used to joke, Too boring. Around midnight, headlights swept across the lawn. Claire was home. A minute later, I heard the front door open. Then close. Her heels crossed the hardwood downstairs. Slowly this time, no sharpness, no confidence, just hesitation. She paused outside my study door. Knocked once. Daniel. I said nothing. A moment later, the door opened anyway. She stepped inside wearing the same black anniversary dress. Her makeup was gone. Her face looked tired and strangely young without it. She saw the bourbon in my hand and stopped. I need to tell you something. I nodded toward the chair across from me. She sat carefully like the cushion might break. For several seconds, she just looked at her hands. Then she whispered, "There's more." I already knew. The way she said it told me that much. Years of operational work teach you to hear truth before words confirm it. What kind of more, I asked. She closed her eyes, then opened them. Victor and I knew each other. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. How he'd been messaging me. There it was. Simple. Clean. Like a blade entering exactly where expected. I took a slow sip of bourbon. When her eyes filled instantly. For about 4 months. I nodded once. No visible reaction. Inside, old instincts compartmentalized pain the way they always had. Neat boxes. Stacked carefully. Opened later. Were you sleeping with him? No. The answer came fast. Too fast to doubt. She leaned forward urgently. No, Daniel, never, I swear. I believed her. Oddly, that made it hurt more. Because betrayal without sex is rarely about lust. It's about value. And that cuts deeper. Then why? Claire broke. Tears spilled down her face as she shook her head. I don't know. Yes, you do. She covered her mouth, breathing hard. Then the truth came out in pieces. Ugly little fragments. Enough to build the whole. Victor had approached her at a charity fundraiser months earlier. He was charming. Confident. Connected. Everything public-facing that I was not. He complimented her. Invited her into conversations with people she admired. Developers, donors, women with polished smiles and expensive jewelry. The social world she always believed she deserved. He made her feel visible, important, respected, and she liked that. So when his messages became flirtatious, she answered. Not physically, not romantically, at least not in the way most people define it, but emotionally, absolutely. She'd entertained him, encouraged him, let herself imagine a different life, a shinier one, all while coming home to me. When she finally looked up, her expression was wrecked with shame. I thought you'd never know. I stared at her. Not angry, just tired. And after a while, I asked the only question that mattered. Were you ashamed of me? Her face collapsed. No, don't lie now. She wept harder. And after several seconds, she whispered the truth. Yes, the word hit harder than any fist ever could. Not because it surprised me, because hearing pain confirmed makes it real in a way suspicion never can. She bowed her head. I thought you lacked ambition. Her voice shook violently. You were always so calm, so content. I almost laughed. Content. The irony was breathtaking. A man spends half his life in classified warfare, then gets mistaken for complacent because he knows how to sit quietly at dinner. Finally, I said, you already had a man worthy of respect. She looked up through tears. I held her gaze. You just wanted applause loud enough for other people to hear it. Claire sobbed openly. And in that moment, I saw the full shape of our marriage. Not one betrayal. Thousands of tiny misunderstandings. Years of assumptions left unchallenged. Silences interpreted as emptiness. Restraint mistaken for weakness. A slow erosion neither of us stopped. I set down my glass, then slipped my wedding ring from my finger. Claire gasped. The sound was small, childlike. Daniel, please. I placed the ring carefully on the desk between us. The gold caught the lamplight. For 12 years, it had rested on my hand through deployments, retirement hospital visits, holidays, funerals, ordinary Tuesdays. Now it looked strangely insignificant. I loved you honestly, I said. She broke into helpless sobs, and that deserved better than this. Then I stood, walked past her, and before dawn touched Norfolk's rooftops, I was gone. The cottage sat on the eastern edge of Chesapeake Bay, about 40 minutes from Norfolk, if traffic behaved itself. It wasn't much to look at. Weathered cedar siding, a narrow porch with 2 rocking chairs left behind by the previous owner, a dock that leaned slightly to the right, like it had grown tired of pretending to stand straight. But it was quiet. And after 12 years of misunderstanding and one night that had burned through the last illusion, my marriage-possessed quiet was exactly what I needed. I moved in 3 days after leaving Claire. No lawyers yet. No dramatic arguments. No division of furniture or carefully worded ultimatums. Just distance. At our age, endings tend to arrive without theatrics. There's no slamming of doors, no reckless speeches, only the tired recognition that two people have finally become honest enough to stop pretending. I brought little with me: clothes, books, a framed photograph of my old team taken outside Coronado in 2009, and the wooden keepsake box that held every medal I'd never displayed. The rest stayed behind. A life can be reduced faster than most people realize. The first week passed in silence. I woke before sunrise every morning as I always had, and walked the shoreline while the bay shifted from black to silver. The gulls cried overhead. Fishing boats hummed in the distance. The cold Atlantic wind off the water cut through everything unnecessary. There's clarity in that kind of cold. It reminds you what matters. And for the first time in years, no one expected me to explain my quiet. No one mistook stillness for absence. The bay simply accepted what I gave it. That was enough. On the 8th day, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Thomas Keegan?" I answered. "Admiral." His familiar dry chuckle came through the line. "You've been retired too long to keep calling me that. Old habits. How are you holding up?" It was a simple question, but men like Keegan know exactly what they're asking. Not whether I was eating or sleeping, but whether the foundation was still intact after the blast. "I'm standing," I said. A pause. Then, "That's something." He told me Victor Kane had already begun cooperating with investigators. Apparently, federal prison had made him discover religion, humility, and selective honesty all at once. His father was under review too. The entire Kane contracting empire was unraveling. There should have been satisfaction in that. There wasn't. Victor had never been the real wound. He was only the spotlight that exposed it. Before hanging up, Keegan said, "We've got younger operators transitioning out. Some are struggling. They trust stories more than lectures." I knew what he meant. He wanted me to mentor, to help men crossing the same uneasy bridge from service to civilian life. Years ago, I'd have declined. That morning, watching the sun rise over Chesapeake Bay, I surprised myself. I'll do it. The work started small. Coffee meetings at a veteran outreach center near Virginia Beach. 3 men at first, then 6, then 15. Former operators, Marines, Navy corpsmen, a few Army Rangers carrying the same invisible weight all warriors eventually carry home. Most were younger than my own service had ever felt. Some wore tension openly. Others hid it behind practice jokes and false ease. I knew both masks, so I didn't lecture. I listened. And when needed, I told the truth plainly. That retirement feels like grief because it is grief. That purpose doesn't vanish when uniform does. That silence can protect a man or imprison him depending on why he keeps it. Funny thing about helping others, sometimes it stitches parts of you back together without asking permission. Weeks became months. The cottage slowly felt like home. I repaired the leaning dock, painted the porch railing, learned which floorboards creaked and which windows stuck after rain. A peaceful life is built through ordinary maintenance. That lesson took me 52 years to learn. Claire wrote often. At first, emails. Then letters when I stopped answering. Apologies filled every line. Regret soaked through every page. She wrote about therapy, about finally understanding how badly she'd mistaken confidence for noise, about seeing now what quiet strength had always looked like. The letters were sincere. I believe that. People can change. Pain often teaches what comfort never will. But change does not erase consequence. One evening in late October, I sat on my porch while the wind rattled dry reeds below the dock. Claire's latest letter rested in my lap. 6 handwritten pages. Honest. Heartbroken. Real. I read every word. Then I carried it inside, lit the fireplace, and fed the pages to the flames. Not in anger, not revenge. Release. The paper curled black and vanished into orange light. Ash drifted upward, then disappeared. And standing there watching the last corner burn, I understood something that had taken me months to learn. Forgiveness is not the same as return. You can wish someone healing without reopening your door. You can love what was and still walk away from what became. That night I slept better than I had in years. And for the first time since Harbor House, I dreamed of nothing at all. Only darkness, peaceful and complete. By morning the bay was still, and so was I. A year passed. Funny how quickly life rebuilds itself when you stop standing in the rubble. By the following spring, Chesapeake Bay had turned that soft blue-gray color it gets just before summer settles in for good. The reeds below my dock stood tall again. The mornings smelled of salt and warming cedar, and the cottage no longer felt like borrowed refuge. It felt like home. That surprised me. At my age, most men believe home is a place they build once and spend the rest of their lives defending. But I'd learned something different. Sometimes home is what you discover after life tears down the version that never truly fit. The mentoring program had grown beyond anything I expected. What began as coffee with a few transitioning veterans had turned into a formal support network across coastal Virginia. Retired operators helping younger service members find civilian footing. No pity, no speeches. Just practical guidance from men who'd already crossed the same uncertain ground. Some needed job contacts. Some needed structure. Some simply needed another man to sit across from them and say, "You're not broken. You're adapting." Those words matter more than most people realize. One afternoon in early May, Admiral Keegan called. Not Thomas. Not an old friend checking in. Rear Admiral Keegan. Formal. That meant business. Commander Mercer. I smiled into the phone. Been a while since you've called me that. You're needed in Norfolk. There was a pause. Then, retirement ceremony. Special Warfare Command request. They want you to speak. I leaned back in my porch chair and looked out over the water. Public speaking had never interested me. But this was different. This was for the young men now standing where I once had. And perhaps for the man I used to be. I'll be there. The ceremony took place at Naval Station Norfolk under a clear Virginia sky. Rows of white chairs faced the reviewing platform. Dress uniforms gleamed beneath the afternoon sun. Families sat proudly in pressed summer clothes, children fidgeting beside mothers who looked equal parts emotional and exhausted. The smell of cut grass mixed with harbor air. Flags stirred softly overhead. It felt like every military ceremony I'd ever attended, and somehow none of them. When Admiral Keegan introduced me, polite applause rolled across the crowd. Most didn't know my history. That was fine. I had spent most of my life doing work no one was meant to know about. Recognition had never been the point. I stepped to the podium and looked out across those young faces. Some eager, some uncertain. Some already carrying burdens they hadn't learned how to name. And I thought about Harbor House, about Victor Kane, about Claire, about the long, quiet road that followed. Then I spoke. When I retired, I said I believed service had ended because the uniform came off. The audience settled deeper into stillness. I continued. I was wrong. A few heads lifted. Service changes form, that's all. The breeze shifted across the platform. Beyond the reviewing field, ships rested quietly at harbor like old guardians. For years, I thought silence was strength by itself. I paused. It isn't. The words surprised even me, because they were the truest thing I had ever said aloud. Silence becomes strength only when paired with purpose. Otherwise, it becomes distance. And distance can cost you things you never meant to lose. A few older officers nodded. They understood. I looked across the rows. At some point, the world will mistake your calm for weakness. I let that settle. Then, let it. A few smiles appeared. Character isn't proven by volume. It reveals itself under pressure. I thought of Bisque running down my face, of Victor on his knees, of Claire finally seeing what had been there all along. And for the first time, the memory held no pain, only perspective. When I finished, the applause came warmer than before. Real. Earned. I stepped down from the podium and moved toward the edge of the field. That was when I saw her. Claire stood near the back beneath a flowering dogwood tree. She looked older, not dramatically, just honestly. The way grief and growth shape a face when enough time has passed. She wore a pale blue dress I remembered buying for her years earlier. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked toward me. Her smile was small and uncertain. "Hello, Daniel." Claire. Up close, I could see the quiet changes. The polished social hunger was gone. In its place was something softer, something real. She clasped her hands together. "I almost didn't come." I nodded. "Why did you?" Her eyes filled slightly. "Because I needed to thank you." I said nothing. She smiled sadly. "You were right. About many things I suspected, but she chose one." Real strength rarely announces itself. Hearing my own words return to me after all this time stirred something gentle inside my chest. Not longing, not regret, just peace. She took a slow breath. "I'm finally learning that." "I'm glad." And I meant it. She looked at me carefully. Not as mystery, not as disappointment, simply as the man I had always been. Then she nodded once. Goodbye without saying goodbye, and walked away. I watched her go without sorrow. Some chapters end painfully. Others end quietly after all the necessary lessons have finally been learned. That evening, I returned to Chesapeake Bay and stood at the end of my dock as sunset turned the water gold. The world was still. Oh, enough. And if this story has taught anything, perhaps it's this. The people who matter will eventually recognize your worth. And the ones who don't, their blindness is not your burden to carry. If you've ever been underestimated, if life ever made you question your own quiet strength, Remember this, the deepest power rarely shouts. Sometimes it simply waits for the right moment to stand. And if this story spoke to something in your own life, take a moment to reflect on the battles you've already survived. Share your thoughts below. And if stories like this remind you of the strength still living inside you, I hope you'll stay a while and join us again. Until next time, stand steady.